What defines pandering? Today, we may think of pandering as obvious, something that is clearly a misfire or a misrepresentation. In other words, a clear attempt at a cash grab, trying to use queer people's struggle and sell it to them in this dumbed down format. However, B. Ruby Rich points out that pandering didn't always take this form. Pandering used to look like straight directors taking the queer struggle on as a challenge. In B. Ruby Rich's perspective, Brokeback Mountain is one of these films, and Ang Lee is one of these directors. In this video essay, we will not only talk about how pandering has devolved over the years from something that could have been compelling to something that is ultimately watered down, but we will also talk about the effects of that on the standard of exploiting the queer story.
In her book, New Queer Cinema, The Director's Cut, B. Ruby Rich discussed the complex way that Brokeback Mountain interacted with queer cinema. This is what she had to say. Brokeback Mountain was a mainstream release inspired by a widely read story by an established author, written by highly regarded screenwriters, directed by a name-brand heterosexual director, a post-identity politics epic, and a hit. Whether that's a good or bad development will have to be decided, as usual, in hindsight.
There's no doubting the impact that Brokeback Mountain made on queer cinema. Brokeback Mountain put queer media into the mainstream, becoming what would be many audiences' first exposure to queer stories in film. However, the film also smashed the box office, and this is where production companies learned for the first time that there was money to be made in queer film. So, while Brokeback Mountain allowed for audiences to view queer people in a new perspective, it also paved the way for money-hungry production companies to access a new, desperate market, which eventually created an environment in which queer representation became another means of soullessly profiting off of queer people.
What better example is there of media that is created for soulless profit than franchises? Many might remember the articles that have floated around for the past decade or so, describing Disney's first queer character. Whether this is Disney's first transgender character, Disney's first gay character, and so on, the one uniting feature of these characters was not their queerness, but the fact that they were forgettable, stereotyped, and inauthentic. The concept of the media franchise, which is defined as Bob Iger as something that creates value across multiple businesses and across multiple territories over a long period of time, betrays authenticity by definition in its search for wealth and fame. If this wasn't always true, the invention of streaming and the erasure of delayed gratification in today's day and age has certainly made it so. The queer franchise character is set up to fail because it is written to cater to the majority. When asked about a possible relationship between two of his leading male characters, J.J. Abrams, director of Disney's The Rise of Skywalker, promised that it was important to me that people who go to see this movie feel that they're being represented in the film. Those who went to see the film would witness one of those leading male characters being sidelined, racially stereotyped as a drug dealer, and written off with a new female character purely to negate the queer suspicions about him.
As queer representation becomes a staple in Hollywood, we are starting to see more bad representation than good representation. As mentioned before, it's easier to write off these queer characters than to include them in your story and offset your regular consumers. Pandering, like we've said, is a complex thing. In the case of the films shown, Love, Simon, Blue is the Warmest Color, Star Wars, Strange World, The Owl House, and so on, these films, even if they have a queer character as their main character, are pandering to straight audiences. Red, White, and Royal Blue is a prime example. While the clips weren't used in this video, the film is a great example of what pandering looks like today, what queer pandering looks like. The film is directed by a queer director. However, this film is still catering to a straight audience. It still dilutes the queer experience in favor for straight consumers. It dilutes this experience down into a consumable format for queer consumers as well, showing them something that they want to see rather than reality. It's hard to say when we'll get good queer representation, because with good queer representation produces a paradox. What does it mean to be truly queer? Our identity as queer people has been formed by the idea of being rejected by society, and the paradox of the accepted queer is calling into question the foundation of that nature. If we are accepted, are we truly queer when we are not pushed from society? Even with looking at our history of being rejected from society, does that idea still remain when we are not? Today, pandering is still very real for queer audiences, and as a medium, it's hard to know when film will ever shake that.